A cold voice rang out at the first-class gate. "Sorry, this lane is for business-class passengers only." Amelia Cross stopped. She tilted her head, raising the ticket clearly marked Seat 2A, First Class. But the eyes of flight attendant Clara Walsh did not waver. The thin smile on the woman's lips was filled with doubt, and behind Amelia, dozens of passengers began to murmur. In that instant, in the middle of a brightly lit airport filled with loudspeaker announcements, a strange silence fell. Clara did not say it outright, but her implication was unmistakable. "Someone like you could hardly have a first-class ticket." Amelia drew a quiet breath, the scent of roasted coffee from a nearby kiosk mixing with the metallic tang of the security scanners. Her senses sharpened. Her pride had been struck, yet her face remained composed. 20 years in the corporate world had taught her this. Showing anger was the trap of prejudice. Clara gestured, her eyes probing. "Perhaps you are in the wrong line. Economy is that way." The words fell like a dull blade, not cutting deep, but still striking every nerve. Amelia extended her ticket, her voice calm yet firm. "Seat 2A, first-class ticket, no mistake." Clara frowned, her forced smile vanishing. She took the ticket and examined it with a suspicious eye, as if checking for forgery. The crowd's attention grew sharper. A few men in suits exchanged glances. A few women slowed their rolling bags to hear how this scene would unfold. In Amelia's mind, old memories replayed like a film running backward. As a child, her father, an airport mechanic, rose at 4 each morning, his uniform stained with grease but always pressed flat. He used to say, "Aviation never sleeps, and you must never sleep on those who will doubt you just because of who you are." That phrase returned now, pouring steel into her straight shoulders. Clara rolled her eyes and called another colleague. "James, come check this for me. I fear there is a mistake in the system." James Tarn, a young attendant, stepped over. He glanced at the ticket, then looked up, meeting Amelia's gaze. For a moment, his face changed color. "Mrs. Cross," his voice caught. "This is the CEO of Aurora Airlines." The air thickened. Clara froze, the ticket trembling in her hand. Whispers spread like waves. "CEO? Is it really her?" One passenger dropped his phone onto the floor, the sharp clatter underscoring the truth laid bare. Amelia gave a slight smile, not of arrogance, but of composure from someone underestimated 1,000 times, yet every time returning stronger. Clara stammered, I didn't know. I didn't recognize." Amelia cut her off, her tone low but clear. "Not recognizing me is not the problem. The problem is that you never believed I belonged here." Those words sliced through the mask of politeness. Clara's head dropped, her cheeks flushed, while James quickly returned the ticket, bowing slightly. "Welcome aboard, Madam CEO Cross. We are honored to serve you." Amelia strode through the first-class gate. Eyes followed, but she did not care. In her mind, a decision had already formed. As certain as an engine roaring to life, this would not be left unresolved. This time, there would be consequences. Behind her, Clara nearly collapsed, her lips trembling. "CEO, how could it be?" But the brutal reality had struck. The woman she belittled was not just a passenger, but the one who held the fate of the entire airline. A moment of humiliation that seemed small had become the spark that would ignite a storm to transform an entire corporation. The skies over Chicago in the 1980s were far from picturesque. They were grey and heavy with exhaust and train whistles. Yet to young Amelia Cross, they were heaven. Each morning, before the clock struck 5, the sound of a steel door echoed shut as her father, Robert Cross, in his aviation engineer's uniform, stepped into the darkness. "Aviation never sleeps, Amelia," he often said, pouring himself a hurried cup of thick black coffee. "And neither do the people who keep it running." At 10 years old, Amelia sat in their small living room clutching a pillow, eyes following her father's silhouette as it disappeared under the streetlights. Beside her, her mother Marjorie, a schoolteacher, lit the world in a different way. The old wooden bookcase leaned under the weight of encyclopedias, business magazines, and the worn newspapers Robert brought home from airport lounges. "Knowledge doesn't care about the color of your skin," her mother would say, resting a gentle hand on Amelia's forehead. "Fill this place," she tapped lightly, "and no one can ever take it away." Those words etched themselves deeply, kindling a quiet but unyielding fire. By 12, Amelia could recite the fleets of every airline: United's Boeing 747s, American's DC-10s, and Delta's brand-new Airbus. By 14, she was not only reading aviation magazines, but sketching out business charts, drafting route expansion strategies like a real planner. One winter afternoon, as snow blanketed her classroom windows, she sat across from the guidance counselor's desk. Mrs. Henderson, silver-haired and skeptical, chuckled. "Harvard? You should be more realistic." She pushed a few pamphlets about community colleges toward Amelia. "Ivy League schools usually aren't meant for girls like you." The words fell cold, like melting ice seeping into her chest. Amelia took the papers, thanked her politely. But that night she stayed at her desk until her fingers went numb, and her eyes burned. For 3 nights, she wrote and rewrote every line of her application essay. 6 months later, a thick envelope arrived at their doorstep. Her parents tore it open, and inside was a letter bearing Harvard's seal. Not just an acceptance, but a full scholarship. Robert held his daughter close, his arms smelling of machine oil, his eyes brimming with tears. Her mother even printed out a picture of Mrs. Henderson and pinned it next to the acceptance letter as a permanent reminder. Never let anyone else define your abilities. Harvard did not roll out a red carpet. Seminars, study groups, skeptical glances. They surrounded Amelia. Her opinions were ignored until a white male classmate repeated them, and suddenly the group nodded in agreement. A professor once stared in disbelief when she scored high on an exam. And during a finance discussion, a classmate remarked, maybe Amelia could share her perspective as a woman of color. Amelia lifted her eyes, her voice calm but firm. My perspective is that of someone who read the entire chapter. Leveraged buyouts need to be analyzed thoroughly for repayment capacity. The room went still. A few chuckles broke the silence. A hand from an Indian student reached out for a high 5. In that moment, Amelia realized she wasn't just studying economics. She was learning how to survive in a world that never expected her to be there. 4 years later, she graduated in the top 3% of her class, standing at a crossroads with 3 offers an investment bank, a consulting firm, or a mid-sized airline called Aurora Airlines. The guidance counselor's warning echoed in her head. Aviation is a boys' club of white men. You'll be stuck in middle management at best. Amelia smiled, thanked her, and signed Aurora's contract that very day. To many, it was a foolish choice. The salary was 30% lower than the other offers. But to Amelia, it was a doorway to the skies, a place difficult enough to prove her worth, and challenging enough to etch her name. She could not have known that this decision would lead straight to today, the day a flight attendant doubted whether she belonged in the first-class lane. As Amelia recalled those childhood mornings, those late nights typing until her hands went numb, she thought quietly to herself, "I have flown through storms far greater than this, and this time I won't be the only one weathering it. Aurora itself will have to change." The early days at Aurora Airlines felt like stepping into a vast labyrinth, gleaming office corridors, walls covered with planning charts, and dozens of booming voices echoing through meeting rooms. To Amelia Cross, it was more than a workplace. It was a battlefield. She began as a strategy analyst at a small desk by a window overlooking the runway. On her first day, she took a deep breath, feeling the rumble of jet engines carrying across the distance. In Amelia's eyes, every number in the financial reports was tied to a real aircraft, a real crew, and thousands of real passengers. From her very first project, she made her mark. In just 6 months, Amelia discovered a way to restructure supply contracts, saving Aurora over $43 million, enough to purchase an entire regional fleet. Her report silenced the room, then broke into a chorus of nods and murmurs of approval. But the next day, when the promotion list was announced, 5 other names, all white men, were chosen. Their achievements were smaller, but they shared one thing in common. They belonged to the club that Amelia had never been invited to. She smiled and congratulated her colleagues, but that night, as she closed her laptop, her hands trembled not from fatigue, but from the injustice clawing at her chest. "Don't get bitter, Amelia," she told herself. "Be strategic." From that day forward, she began keeping meticulous records. Every achievement, every cost saving, every innovation was catalogued into a thick file. She quietly built alliances, cultivating trust with fair-minded senior managers and connecting with certain board members. Amelia knew that if she could not tear down the wall in one blow, she would lay the groundwork brick by brick until it collapsed on its own. In her 3rd year, Aurora plunged into crisis. Fuel prices spiked, 2 major competitors reeled, one even declared bankruptcy. The board of directors was in chaos. Meetings dragged on past midnight. Amelia, then only a mid-level director, quietly submitted a proposal, a fuel hedging strategy. Some managers scoffed. "Do you think you're in an MBA class?" Another chimed in. "Leave it to the big boys. This isn't a game for young women." Amelia did not argue. She handed in a 70-page plan, filled with charts and contingency models. When the crisis peaked, Aurora was the only airline still afloat. Amelia's strategy had saved the company from bankruptcy. Overnight, her position shifted. The board could no longer ignore her. Amelia was promoted 3 levels in a row, becoming the youngest vice president of strategy in the company's history. But the spotlight carried shadows. The higher she rose, the clearer she saw how the club operated. At lavish dinners and golf outings after hours, crucial staffing decisions were made in rooms where she was never present. Each time she entered a meeting, laughter dimmed. Skeptical eyes swept across her tailored suit, as if to ask, "What are you doing here?" Amelia knew that feeling all too well, but this time it was different. She was no longer the little girl in Detroit daydreaming at the window. She was a true leader now, and she knew she was drawing closer to the center of power. 3 years later, her name carried a new title, Chief Operating Officer. Yet in the shadows, the whispers persisted. Some claimed she was simply lucky. Others said diversity had forced the board's hand. Those voices were like dull blades, scraping against steel, incapable of breaking her, only forging her harder. On the night before the old CEO announced his retirement, Amelia sat alone in her office on the 27th floor. Outside, the runway lights glittered like rows of stars. She looked down at the file she had built over 15 years, every line of evidence proving she was not only deserving but irreplaceable. Amelia smiled faintly. She had gone from the girl told to be realistic to the woman holding the destiny of Aurora in her hands. Yet she did not know that her greatest test would not come from spreadsheets or business strategies. It was waiting at the boarding gate, where a flight attendant named Clara Walsh dared to question whether she belonged in first class. A new battle had begun, no longer a battle to climb upward, but to transform the very culture of an empire. The day the board of directors announced their decision, the conference room on the 30th floor fell silent for a few seconds. Then came the applause, long and resonant against the glass ceiling. Amelia Cross, 41 years old, had been unanimously elected as the first black female CEO in the history of American aviation. In the press, her image was everywhere. The woman who shattered the glass ceiling, the new face of diversity in the industry. The headlines burst like fireworks, but Amelia knew that even the most brilliant fireworks lasted only a few seconds before fading into the night. In her new office, with its wide leather chair and polished wooden desk, Amelia sat upright, though her heart was heavy. Because, along with the congratulations, she also heard the whispers. Can she handle the pressure? Was the board just making a show of diversity? The old club won't make it easy for her. As expected, the welcome party for the new CEO was marked by absences. Rival CEOs were too busy to attend, and several senior executives at Aurora excused themselves with meetings. In a room filled with glasses of wine, the empty spaces echoed louder than the soft strains of jazz. Amelia was no stranger to doubt, but now it had reached a new scale, doubt at the national level. She responded in the only way she knew, by working relentlessly. 14 hours a day, she reviewed every operations report, every profit figure with her own hands. The results came faster than anticipated. For 2 consecutive quarters, Aurora posted record profits. Cash flow was stable. The stock price surged. Hard numbers were a more powerful response than any speech. But just as the light began to shine, the shadows deepened. Victor Reynolds, 58 years old, a powerful member of the board, began to show his hand. In meetings he would lean back, pen idle, smirking as he said, "The upcoming merger won't be easy, Cross. Pacific West is full of heavy hitters. Are you sure you can handle it? Or should we send Reynolds along to support you?" The word support dripped with condescension. Amelia smiled faintly and replied calmly, I have analyzed the entire financial report, evaluated the fleet, assessed the corporate culture, and prepared 3 different negotiation scenarios. But if Mr. Reynolds believes he has something to add, I am always open. Her words were sharp as a blade wrapped in velvet, and the room went still. Reynolds rolled his eyes and pressed his lips together, but he did not argue. That night, back in her office, Amelia stood at the window looking down at the runway. Dozens of golden lights glowed like an artificial constellation stretching into the dark. She thought of her father, the engineer who had devoted his life to keeping planes in the sky. And now, his daughter was steering an entire fleet, while also bracing against a storm of prejudice. On her desk, the calendar was marked clearly: tomorrow, a flight to San Francisco, the beginning of historic negotiations with Pacific West. Amelia carefully folded 3 suits: navy Armani for the main meeting, burgundy Chanel for the welcome dinner, and simple Prada for the facility tour. To most, they were just clothes, but to Amelia, they were armor, each color a layer of defense against doubt. She knew that a single misstep could shatter not only her career, but also risk Aurora being swallowed whole. Before going to bed, Amelia reopened her preparation documents. In the dim glow of the desk lamp, her face revealed fatigue, yet her eyes still burned with determination. In her mind, her mother's words echoed, "Fill this place." Her hand had once tapped Amelia's forehead, and no one can ever take it away. Tomorrow, at the airport gate, the probing eyes would be waiting, and there, Clara Walsh would appear. A small piece of the puzzle, but enough to ignite the earthquake that would force all of Aurora to change. Atlanta International Airport glowed like its own city. Metal, glass, and fluorescent lights blended into a vast canvas where every step echoed with the urgency of thousands of travelers. Amelia Cross pulled her Louis Vuitton suitcase and joined the rushing stream of people. It was 6:30 a.m., an ordinary day for many, but for Amelia it was destiny, the flight that would take her to San Francisco, where a historic merger would be decided. She wore a charcoal pantsuit, a delicate gold bracelet on her wrist, and her hair pulled neatly into a bun. Every detail had been considered carefully. For Amelia, appearance was not vanity. It was armor against prejudice. But as soon as she reached the priority check, in desk, she caught that familiar look, a flicker of hesitation followed by a forced smile. The young agent glanced up from the screen, his voice faltering. "Good morning, Miss Cross." "That's right," Amelia answered evenly. "You are flying first class to San Francisco today." It should have been a statement, yet it came out as a question. Amelia placed her passport on the counter, her eyes steady. The agent lowered his gaze, checking the ticket longer than necessary, his eyes darting as if searching for an error. Just steps away, 2 white businessmen were greeted quickly, waved through with nothing more than a nod. "May I see your ID?" the agent asked. Amelia pressed her lips together lightly and produced her identification. In that moment, memories surged back. The countless times she had been asked to prove she belonged in places she had fought to reach. But this time, she would not show anger. Restraint was her weapon. At last, the ticket was returned with a strained smile. "Enjoy your flight, ma'am. The first-class lounge is to the right." Amelia gave a small nod, rolling her suitcase forward, but she did not forget the doubtful look. Inside the luxurious lounge, she chose a quiet corner facing the runway. One by one, planes launched into the sky like silver arrows. Amelia opened her laptop, ready to review merger documents, but the voices nearby drew her attention. Two men at the next table spoke loud enough to be impossible to ignore. "I hear Aurora is merging with Pacific West. Bold move." The other took a sip of whiskey, far too early in the day, and replied, "Bold, yes, but with the new CEO, I hear it's just a diversity stunt." Amelia typed on her keyboard, her face expressionless, but her hand tightened. She was far too familiar with whispers like these, where diversity was dismissed as a publicity trick rather than true achievement. When a server brought her water, the hesitant voice came again. "Excuse me, but this area is reserved for first-class passengers and platinum members." Amelia lifted her head slightly, placing her ticket on the table, her voice calm. "I am first class." Silence spread. The server bowed awkwardly, while the two men beside her stopped talking, sneaking glances in her direction. Amelia allowed herself a faint smile and returned to her screen. She knew the real confrontation was only minutes away. At 7:15, the boarding announcement echoed overhead. Amelia adjusted her jacket and walked to the gate. Two lines stretched forward, general boarding and first class and elite. She entered the priority lane, her posture straight. But before she could hand over her ticket, a figure stepped in front of her. A flight attendant with a neat blonde bob, uniform crisp, name badge gleaming. Clara Walsh. Clara's eyes flicked from the suitcase to the tailored suit, then settled on Amelia's face. A professional smile appeared briefly, then vanished. She raised her hand, her voice firm. "I'm sorry, this lane is for first-class passengers and elite members only." Amelia held out her ticket, her gaze locked on Clara. "I'm in seat 2A. First class." Clara frowned, her tone heavy with doubt. "Perhaps you're mistaken. This is first class. Your seat must be in economy." The air thickened. Passengers behind began to murmur, some craning their necks to watch. Amelia heard the whispers. "What's going on?" She drew in a deep breath and pressed each word with clarity. "No mistake. Seat 2A, first class." Clara took the ticket, turning it in her hands as if searching for a forgery. Then, without hesitation, she called over her shoulder, "James, come here. We have a situation." In that instant, Amelia felt it fully. A storm was about to break. The crowd behind began to press forward, no one wanting to miss the unfolding scene. A few phones were raised discreetly, shaky lenses capturing every second. Clara Walsh clutched the ticket tightly, her eyes sweeping over Amelia as though she were facing a dangerous intruder. "These tickets cost more than $2,000, Clara said, lowering her voice, but still loud enough for many to hear. "I need further verification. How did you get this?" The question cut through the air like a blade. The implication was clear. A woman like her could not possibly be here legitimately. Amelia held a thin smile, unblinking. Inside her chest, her heart pounded hard, but outwardly she stood tall, her body seeming forged from cold steel. "James, over here," Clara called sharply, signaling a young attendant. James Tarn approached, tall and lean, his expression calm until the moment he took the ticket from Clara's hand. He glanced down and read the name of the passenger, Amelia Cross. His eyes widened slightly. He looked up, his gaze locking with Amelia's. In that instant, his composure shattered. My God, he whispered, his voice trembling. Then he straightened, his voice rising loudly enough for all to hear. This is the CEO of Aurora Airlines. The words landed like thunder. The crowd fell silent. Those who had been whispering dropped their eyes to their phones, pretending to be busy. A few people gaped in disbelief. An elderly woman gasped, murmuring, "The CEO. It's really her." Clara froze. Her face went pale. Her hands shook. The ticket slipped from her grasp onto the check. In desk, the small sound striking sharply in the hushed air. CEO, Clara stammered. I didn't know. Amelia bent down and picked up the ticket, the deliberate motion like a declaration. Her eyes pierced into Clara's, not with loud anger, but with a calmness so suffocating it left no room to breathe. "Not recognizing me is not the problem," Amelia said, her voice low and resonant. "The problem is that you did not believe I belonged here." Clara opened her mouth, scrambling to explain. "I was just following procedure." "What procedure?" Amelia cut her off, her voice ringing back, sharp as a blade. "The procedure of questioning a black passenger while letting others pass without so much as a glance." The words reverberated, not only in Clara's ears, but in the hearts of everyone watching. A few passengers lowered their heads, ashamed of what they had witnessed. James, standing beside them, bowed deeply, his voice urgent. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Cross. Please board the plane. We are honored to serve you." Amelia gave a slight nod, straightened her jacket, and without another word walked directly through the first-class gate, her footsteps striking the floor like the steady beat of a war drum. Behind her, Clara stood frozen, her face ghostly white, her lips trembling. In her mind, a single question echoed. What have I done? In the first-class cabin, Amelia stowed her suitcase in the overhead compartment and sat in seat 2A. Every movement was precise, composed, but in her mind, a fire was burning. This was not just a personal insult. It was living proof of what she had known all along. Prejudice was never a small matter. It ran deep, woven into the system. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly. A prepared message was sent to Devon Brooks, head of human resources. "An incident of discrimination just occurred in front of dozens of witnesses. Begin investigation immediately. I will provide details on the flight." She pressed send. In that moment, Amelia was no longer a humiliated passenger. She had reclaimed her place, the woman who held the fate of an entire corporation. The plane took off, engines roaring. High above the clouds, a decision crystallized. This time there would be consequences, not just for Clara Walsh, but for the rotten culture that had allowed this to exist. The first-class cabin glowed with soft golden light. The engines rumbled beneath like the heartbeat of a giant, keeping the Airbus 320 steady as it glided across the sky. Amelia Cross sat in seat 2A, arms folded, her eyes fixed on the white clouds outside the window. But in her mind, every detail of the confrontation at the first-class gate still echoed like a scar. A figure appeared at her side. James Tarn, his face still tense, bowed slightly. "Mrs. Cross, would you like something before takeoff? Champagne or coffee?" "Just mineral water," Amelia replied curtly. Then she lifted her gaze, her voice lowered. "And one more thing. I do not want Ms. Walsh serving in first class on this flight." James hesitated for a moment, then nodded firmly, almost on reflex. "Yes, I will personally handle all of first-class service." Amelia gave a slight nod. For a brief moment, their eyes met. James saw in the CEO's eyes not just anger, but a cold determination, the strength of someone who had endured too many times of being underestimated. The plane shuddered, lifting off the ground, soaring into the sky. When the seatbelt sign went off, James returned with a tray. He set the glass of water on the table, then hesitated. "Mrs. Cross, I apologize again. What happened earlier, it does not reflect the values Aurora stands for." Amelia turned the glass slowly in her hand, staring into the shimmering water. Her voice was low, steady, but each word fell heavy as lead. "Are you sure, James? Because for me, this is not the first time, and I am certain I am not the only one." James lowered his head. His lips pressed tight, then he finally admitted, "There have been many complaints before. Black passengers being questioned about tickets, doubted, even denied. But most of them were dismissed as misunderstandings." Amelia tightened her grip on the glass. What she had suspected was now confirmed. "And Walsh?" James cast a quick glance toward the rear cabin where Clara was assisting her colleagues in economy. His voice dropped. "At least 5 official complaints. But each time, they disappeared from the system. The reasons recorded were misunderstanding or overly sensitive customer." Silence fell. Only the sound of wind rushing outside the fuselage remained. Amelia exhaled, but inside, her anger was no longer burning hot. It had turned into something colder, harder, like ice forged into steel. "Thank you, James," she said. "Your honesty will be remembered. From now on, focus on serving the passengers. The rest, leave to me." James nodded and stepped back. Amelia opened her laptop, her fingers striking the keys with force, each letter like a hammer blow. She wrote a detailed report, noting the time, the place, the words, the attitude. Every detail recorded, not just as evidence, but to expose the culture of cover-ups that had lasted too long. A while later, Clara appeared. Her face was pale, her smile forced. She stepped closer, her voice low and trembling. "Mrs. Cross, I want to apologize. What happened at the gate, it was just a misunderstanding." Amelia lifted her eyes, her gaze cutting like a blade. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated, her voice calm but icy. "I presented a valid ticket, yet you blocked me. I had to prove myself multiple times while others walked straight through. That is not a misunderstanding, Ms. Walsh. That is an assumption that someone like me could not possibly sit in first class." Clara's words caught in her throat, her eyes glistening as if tears would spill. I did not mean to offend." "Intentions do not matter," Amelia cut her off. "Consequences matter, and the consequences this time will not be like before. Believe me, this will not end with an apology." The cabin was utterly silent. A few passengers turned, their faces showing both discomfort and admiration. Clara lowered her head and retreated quietly, her shoulders trembling. Amelia turned back to her screen. Her fingers struck harder against the keyboard. A message was sent out. "Devon, prepare to open a full investigation. This is not just one employee. This is a systemic problem." She closed her laptop and leaned back. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, sunlight spilling gold across the wings. But inside Amelia, a storm had begun to form, and this time, it would tear down even the most fortified walls of Aurora. The Airbus 320 shuddered lightly as its wheels touched down on the San Francisco runway. The cabin lights came on, and the captain's voice flowed evenly over the speakers. "Welcome to San Francisco. The weather today is clear and warm." Passengers stirred, standing up, luggage clattering in the aisles. But in seat 2A, Amelia Cross remained still, her eyes focused, her posture straight. The larger battle awaited outside. As the cabin gradually emptied, James Tarn approached, bowing slightly. "Mrs. Cross, Captain Pearson is waiting in the forward cabin. He knows you requested to meet." Amelia nodded, gathered her laptop and handbag, and walked straight ahead. In the front cabin, the air was taut with tension. Captain William Pearson, silver streaks in his hair, stood tall and dignified. Beside him was Clara Walsh, her face pale, eyes swollen and red. Behind them waited Patricia Hartman, the San Francisco regional manager, already in uniform. "Thank you for meeting me immediately," Amelia began, her tone calm yet cutting. "I need to deliver a direct report before leaving the plane." Pearson gave a respectful nod. "Yes, Mrs. Cross." Amelia turned to face Clara. "Ms. Walsh, this morning, in front of dozens of witnesses, you repeatedly blocked me after I presented a valid first-class ticket. You questioned whether I belonged in this cabin, even implying that I may have obtained my ticket unlawfully. You only changed your attitude after learning I am the CEO." Clara trembled, stammering. I only wanted to make sure procedure was followed." "What procedure?" Amelia cut in, her voice sharp as a blade. "Other passengers walked through without a single question. Why was I the only one stopped?" Silence hung heavy. Clara lowered her head, unable to speak. Amelia turned toward Pearson. "I want an official report, every detail, from the boarding gate to what happened on this flight." Pearson straightened, his voice firm. "I witnessed the conclusion of the incident, and will confirm it. This was discrimination, undeniable." Patricia Hartman spoke cautiously. "Mrs. Cross, I have been briefed on the situation. I will coordinate with Human Resources to begin an investigation." Amelia cut her off, her eyes drilling into her. "Not just an investigation. Effective immediately, Clara Walsh will be removed from the return flight. I will not allow her to continue serving passengers under these circumstances." Clara stiffened, her eyes widening in panic. "Please, this is my only job. I have a family, a mortgage." Amelia lowered her voice, but each word landed with the weight of judgment. "You thought of your family. But how many passengers like me have been forced to swallow humiliation in silence, then return home still carrying that pain? How many people have been told they don't belong here? They too have families. They too have lives. Did you think of them?" Clara broke into tears, but Amelia did not waver. She turned to Hartman. "I demand immediate suspension procedures, followed by a full investigation. I will personally review all past complaints involving Walsh and others connected to them. This time there will be no excuses of misunderstandings or overly sensitive customers. Hartman swallowed hard and nodded. Yes, Mrs. Cross. I will act at once. Amelia then addressed Pearson, her tone warmer. Captain, thank you for your cooperation and integrity. I expect your full report submitted to Human Resources before the end of today. Pearson gave a solemn nod. You have my word of honor. Amelia drew a long breath and adjusted her bag. Standing among the three, she delivered her final words like a verdict. Today, a flight attendant failed, but the greater failure is the system that has hidden these violations for years. I will not let it continue. Aurora will change, starting here, starting now. She turned and descended the airplane stairs. The San Francisco morning light fell across Amelia's upright figure, casting her as the embodiment of quiet power. On her phone, a notification appeared. Devon Brooks, HR Director, had received the order to begin the investigation. A tidal wave had just begun to form, and Amelia knew the true battle was only starting. The Four Seasons Hotel in San Francisco was silent, the scent of walnut wood mixing with the faint fragrance of orchids drifting through the hallway. Amelia Cross had just set down her suitcase when her phone buzzed. The name on the screen read, Devon Brooks, Human Resources Director of Aurora. She answered, her voice low and firm. Devon, tell me. On the other end, his voice came through, tense and heavy. Amelia, I dug into Clara Walsh's records. The results are far worse than we thought. 7 official complaints over the last 5 years. Every single one from black passengers, every single one dismissed as a misunderstanding. Not a single note in her personnel file. Amelia closed her eyes, her chest tightening. Faces of strangers flashed in her mind. Passengers who had been humiliated and then quietly disappeared into the shadows of the system. And who signed off on this? She asked. Devon hesitated for a moment. Mostly Timothy Brooks, regional manager. But above him, Michael Dawson, Vice President of Customer Service. And Dawson, who backs him? None other than Victor Reynolds. The name rang out like a warning bell. Reynolds, the old wolf on the board, the one who had leaned back in his chair and sneered that Amelia should have someone accompany her. Amelia gripped the phone tighter. Do we have proof Reynolds knew? Devon lowered his voice. Not in writing, but I found traces of an internal investigation in 2022 into discrimination in first-class service. That report disappeared. The person in charge was reassigned to Omaha. Rumor has it, Reynolds personally shut the investigation down. Amelia opened her laptop, her hands trembling not from fear, but from fury. She scrolled through the emails Devon had sent. Chains of data, complaint statistics, charts revealing a stark imbalance between white and black passengers. The numbers told the painful truth. Complaints from white passengers were resolved 83% of the time, while those from black passengers only 37%. Cold statistics, but beneath them were the silenced cries of thousands. This is no longer an isolated incident, Devon, Amelia whispered. This is systemic, and Reynolds is at the center of it. Devon exhaled heavily. I know, but Amelia, you understand what I'm saying. Going after Reynolds means going up against the network of power he has built for 2 decades. Many executives owe him favors. The board will push back. Amelia let out a cold, sharp smile. Let them. I didn't come here to hold a seat. I came here to change Aurora. She ended the call, her eyes landing on her own reflection in the window glass. Outside, San Francisco's fog drifted like a sea of clouds, hiding the towers beneath. Darkness concealed, just as Aurora's system had concealed the truth for years. The door opened. Devon had flown in urgently, carrying a thick stack of files. He set them on the table, papers rustling like wind slipping through a crack. This is what I managed to get. Part of the old report, a few leaked emails. Enough to start, not enough to bring Reynolds down. Amelia flipped through the pages. Hastily typed lines, notes scratched out, but the truth still gleamed. A network shielding those who discriminated, funneling every complaint into a dead end. He thought he could bury this forever, Amelia said quietly, her voice hardening. What he doesn't understand is that a single spark is enough to burn the darkness away. Devon looked up and met Amelia's gaze, a gaze no longer just of an executive, but of a warrior. Amelia, the board is meeting this weekend. Reynolds will surely try to spin this, paint you as reckless over a personal incident. Are you ready? Amelia rose, her posture tall and unshaken like a mast in a storm. I have spent my entire life proving I belonged here. Now it is time to prove that Aurora itself must belong to the right values. Outside, the horns of San Francisco traffic echoed, mingling with the sigh of the ocean wind. A storm was coming, not in the skies, but in Aurora's boardroom. And at the center of that storm, Amelia Cross had chosen her place, to face Victor Reynolds and the system he had built head-on. The boardroom on the 30th floor of Aurora gleamed under crystal lights. The glass wall reflected the skyline of Atlanta, but no one on the board was calm enough to admire it. The air was thick, tense, ready to explode. At the head of the table sat Victor Reynolds, leaning back in his pinstripe suit, eyes brimming with confidence. He had managed to call an emergency meeting, officially titled Evaluating CEO Cross's Response to the Passenger Incident at the Airport. A few members nodded along with Reynolds, clearly his allies. They expected a familiar script. Amelia would be painted as emotional, then pressured to step back from the investigation. But when Amelia Cross entered, the atmosphere shifted. Wearing a navy suit, her gaze icy, each of her steps cut across the polished wooden floor like a blade. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice low but resonant. "I was informed that the board wants to hear about the incident at the first-class gate. So let me tell you everything." Reynolds smirked. "We all know it was just a minor misunderstanding. But your reaction, Amelia, was excessive. Suspending a flight attendant immediately, issuing an order for a full investigation. I fear you are letting personal feelings control your leadership." A few members nodded again. Reynolds smiled, convinced he held the upper hand. But Amelia did not respond with words. She opened her laptop and linked it to the large screen. Charts, numbers, and documents appeared in sequence. "Here," she pointed, "is Aurora's service complaint resolution rate over the last 5 years. White passengers, 83% of complaints resolved or compensated. Black passengers, 37%. This disparity is not random. It is proof of systemic discrimination." The room buzzed. The CFO frowned. "These numbers, They are very serious." Amelia continued, her tone sharp as a blade. "Here is the complaint history of flight attendant Clara Walsh. 7 incidents in 5 years, all erased from the official record. Who approved the deletions? Timothy Brooks. Who oversaw Brooks? Michael Dawson. And who backed Dawson? None other than you, Victor Reynolds." Reynolds shot up, his voice loud and angry. "This is slander. You have no proof I was involved." Amelia calmly pressed a button. The screen displayed an internal email from 2022, with Reynolds's digital signature. The chilling line read, "Ensure this report does not reach the CEO. Handle it quietly. Transfer Taylor immediately." Silence fell across the room. Reynolds's face drained of color, his hands gripping the chair. Amelia stepped forward, her voice dropping but echoing with force. "You see now? This is not about one flight attendant making mistakes. This is a system built to protect prejudice, to bury the truth, and to let passengers suffer humiliation. And Reynolds is the architect of it." A veteran director spoke, his voice shaking. "Victor, is this true? Do you realize you have put this entire company at risk of lawsuits worth billions?" Reynolds let out a bitter laugh, scrambling to regain control. "You're all going to side with her? She's turning a minor incident into a witch hunt. If we continue down this path, we'll lose shareholders. We'll lose the Pacific West deal." Amelia turned to the room, her eyes blazing. "No. If we continue covering this up, we will lose everything. Our customers, our employees, and Aurora's future. We cannot allow a culture of discrimination to rule this airline any longer." For a moment, silence. Then Captain William Pearson, invited as a witness, stood up. His voice rang deep and steady. "I confirm what Mrs. Cross says. I was pressured by Dawson to soften my report. This is the first time in 20 or still 7 years of service that I was ever asked to falsify the truth." James Tarn, the young attendant, stepped forward too, his voice trembling but resolute. "I have seen many colleagues told to scrutinize black passengers. Anyone who objected was reassigned to worse shifts and routes. I cannot stay silent any longer." One testimony after another. The wall of silence that had stood for years crumbled right before Reynolds's eyes. Chairman Lawrence Chen struck his gavel. "Enough. With this evidence and testimony, I propose the immediate suspension of Victor Reynolds from all board activities, the launch of an independent investigation, and granting CEO Cross full authority to implement cultural reform." The vote was swift. The result, 10 in favor, 2 opposed. Reynolds looked around, his face contorted with rage, before being escorted out. Amelia remained seated, her back straight, her hands on the table. In her eyes there was no gloating, only the steady light of conviction, the light of a leader who had turned personal humiliation into the beginning of a cultural revolution. That day, Aurora Airlines did not just have a new CEO. It had been reborn. In the corporate world, mistakes are often buried beneath polished reports and artificial smiles. But sometimes the smallest of moments, seemingly insignificant, hold the power to expose an entire rotten system. For Amelia Cross, that moment was nothing more than when a flight attendant blocked her from entering the first-class lane. Clara Walsh had no idea that her actions would become a stone cast upon a still pond, sending ripples outward, sweeping across every level of Aurora Airlines. And it is precisely because of that this story became living proof that injustice never stops at a single person. It is always the reflection of a system. What set Amelia apart was not the authority of being a CEO. Authority can stay silent. Authority can choose safety. But Amelia chose to confront. She transformed personal humiliation into the driving force for a full-scale investigation, uncovering a network of cover-ups that had existed for years. That is the true essence of leadership, not to guard a chair, but to tear down the rotten ones and build a foundation anew. This story also reminds us of a painful truth. Discrimination does not persist because of obvious villains, but because of the silence of those who witness it. Complaints that vanish, reports buried, eyes that pretend not to see, all of these sustain a system that seems untouchable. And only when someone is brave enough to rise does the light finally break into the darkness. Today, Aurora is no longer the same Aurora. Under Amelia's leadership, it has become a new symbol, a place where every passenger is welcomed into the seat they deserve, a place where every employee is judged by their ability and not by prejudice. An airline can change, and from that, an entire industry is forced to look inward at itself. But the greater question remains: what about us? If one day you witness someone being diminished simply because they are different, will you turn away, or will you stand up and say, enough? If you believe that justice is not a luxury, but the inherent right of every human being, hit like to help spread this story. If you want to continue traveling with us on these journeys where justice speaks, hit subscribe and become part of this community. And before you go, leave a comment with 3 words: justice first. Because sometimes all it takes is a single moment of courage to force an entire system to change.